The Fire Emblem sword.
Yeah, that's Chrom's Falchion, and I put that in quotation marks because nothing about this is Falchion-like in any way. Kind of funny, but it's a functional design.
Mind you, this one is the foam version of the Fire Emblem sword. Let's talk about the hole.
Yeah, what is up with that? I mean, I'm assuming it's just decorative. I can't think of any purpose. I mean, there are a lot of designs where you put your finger through a ring or a hole in some kind of way just so it's protected. You can't do that here. In fact, I used to think this is a weak spot, more likely to break, but actually it sort of is up here. Because the thing is, the circular cutout is fine because the force is distributed. When you have a problem is when you get sharp corners like this, because that's where stress fractures are likely to happen. I don't think it's that terribly likely, so it's not really a big deal. And overall, like size and everything is fine. I find the blade is a bit short for the handle size, but that being said, there are Chinese swords in particular, you know, the Gen, that has quite a large handle, and you know, it's single-handed. That's this kind of deal here. In this picture, the proportions actually look just about perfect to me. By the way, I would love to test a well-made, accurate, functional reproduction of this. So any bladesmiths who might be watching or looking for a challenge, let me know.
Very interesting design choice on the game designer's part to put the hole in the sword. It's very similar to Ciri's sword from The Witcher. I won't lie, I'm not a huge fan of holes in the middle of sword blades, but I do like your take on. I
can see why, just aesthetically, just design-wise, I can see it. It just adds something. It's just a little bit more visually interesting. And really, it's just an extension of other kinds of hilt. You know, if you have a guard, like an upswept guard that goes like this, and normally the blade would go that way, you just change it around by sort of extending the guards into the blade. Sort of. So design-wise, it makes sense, and it looks interesting. So I've always liked this design, actually. In terms of practicality, I mean, it's fine. You know, there are more protective guards, but it's, you know, it's a decent amount of width, so you can kind of keep the hands behind it. Now, one weird thing that could happen is, let's say somebody thrusts and you try to catch it with the blade, but you mistime it a little bit, and the blade goes through here, and it's stuck. You could actually use it to your advantage. You can kind of lock it in. Not that you could attack at that point, because your blade is bound up, but
that's a great point.
It's an idea. Generally, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. You can definitely use this with one hand, you know, with the handle as a bit of a counterbalance, or with two. But for that, it's a bit short. I feel like I've talked about this before in a video. I don't remember for sure, but I'm pretty sure I've talked about this at some point.
He's done too many videos, guys.
I've made too many videos, and my memory is garbage, so that doesn't help.
I'm just kidding. I'm just
No, you're totally right. The iron sword from Skyrim. I think I've mentioned this before as the most functional generally are the iron weapons for the most part, and they're just simpler overall. I mean, you've got some decoration there, but in terms of design, really the proportions and sizing are a little bit weird. At least if it's supposed to be sort of Viking-esque, which a little bit, I mean, not quite, but you can see that they took some inspiration, but it's also more like later medieval themed, general medieval inspired fantasy. So this is, I feel like this whole thing needs to be downscaled to 80% or so, because it wants to be a single-handed sword, but then the handle is very long, the guard is huge, right? The blade is very wide, so you don't really need all of that. If you want a two-handed sword, this is pretty much longsword sized, which would kind of work. You can sort of make that work. But overall, if it's supposed to be a single-handed one, it's a bit large for that.
I mean, there's a reason why the better shaped weapons mod was made that I talked about back in 2014. The redesigned version has much better proportions, so it would not only be more functional, but also just looks better. Interestingly, the way the steel swords in Oblivion were shaped was much more appealing. I don't know what happened along the way, but the proportions got out of whack, in my opinion.
Once again, these are foam. These are high-density foam products, in case you're wondering why it's looking really light in Skull's hands, it is. So what's your take on these Daedric items here?
Yeah, so this I've redesigned once in a video to make it a little bit more practical, because this is all edgelord stuff. This is more for looks than functionality. I mean, yeah, with this kind of thickness, I guess it becomes more like a bludgeon. Like you could strike with that and it would do something, but it's not so much for cutting. When you have such large serrations or cutouts or whatever you want to call that, you get into the territory where it's just not really going to cut. It's just, you're going to cut maybe like this up to here, and then it stops there because it bunches up, like the clothing bunches up and stops it there, or this hits a bone and gets hooked and stuff. There's so much that can go wrong here, but we're talking Daedric, so they're a little crazy, right? So that's to be expected. I think I remember someone pointing out that the handle is supposed to be painful. Like they're into that.
That makes sense within the lore of the Daedra lore in the Elder Scrolls.
The guard is actually not a problem. Like, this doesn't get in the way. I think I probably mentioned the pommel too. This is like something pointing up, but depending on the proportions, like this here, you can easily hold that with one hand or even with two hands, and I don't think, yeah, that's not really going to get in the way. And if it does, said they're apparently into that, they want to be poked, and
that's a good point. So this is very lore conscious, but it's funny because if I wanted to knock someone unconscious with a pommel, this is probably the pommel I'd want to use.
Yeah. On the other hand, half sorting I would not recommend with this.
Yes.
Oh, how? This is to me quintessentially what excessive fantasy is, like over-designed fantasy, sort of. This is what they often do. Just add more spikes, add more corners, more stuff, split it here, and add more hooks and things. Just add as many elements as possible, and it's just, in my opinion, it's just too much. They had intentions with that, obviously. I just think it's too much. You know, this could be simplified. It would still be edgy. It would still be demonic, and it would look better too. Not just be more functional because you have magic and all that. I get it, you know. That's not the main concern. But even just aesthetically, I think this could be simplified and actually look better. In fact, this does look better. There's not quite as much going on here, right? You get some serrations here. This split off part here, that could be omitted. Stuff like that. But overall, it's... Yeah, I do think personally this looks better. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's funny. It's funny because we were talking about our very first sword designs when we were growing up. And I'm just smiling because this reminds me of how I would have drawn some of my first swords. Like in elementary school and stuff like that, when I was drawing my first like knights. Obviously all my drawings were terrible, but this is how I would probably design a sword or dagger. When I'm not thinking about anything else and I'm letting my imagination run wild. I think that's the beauty of some of these. When it comes to fiction, nothing matters. Physics doesn't matter because when you go through an Oblivion gate, regular physics might not apply. Incidentally, I guess physics does apply in the Oblivion gates, but yeah, there's a lot of things that you don't need to think about, which is kind of cool. So I do definitely think that there's a huge space and a lot of room for just encouraging people to like unleash their creativity when it comes to the world of fiction. Because yeah, if you look at some of our battle-ready products, a lot of them can be a little bit more simple, basic, but historically that is what worked, you know? Getting all these elements, putting them all over the place, it doesn't work. It's not practical. It might waste steel. There's very real world constraints and the environmental constraints, historical constraints that drove real swords to what they look like today. Whereas here, you can tell an artist just went crazy. And I love that. That's really neat and a huge testament to their creativity.
Yeah, I mean, in fantasy, the point is you don't want to see the same old boring stuff that exists in the real world that you've seen 100 times and whatever. You want something a little bit different. It's just, it all boils down to personal preference. You know, like I have a certain cutoff point where they add so much stuff that it's too much for my taste. But I like a lot of, you know, fancier shapes and ornamental features and all that.
What would be fun is if we can do a video one day where we make real steel versions of all of this, and then we get people to spar, obviously in a safe, controlled environment, like do a night fight, but with wacky swords from fantasy. I feel like that would be a fun video to watch. I'm curious, but obviously it wouldn't be fair to put someone, you know, using a dagger like this against a real dagger. So you would need to face them off with two completely impractical, wacky designs, and then just see how
Battle of the impractical weapons. I like that idea.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
This is a battle-ready Witcher sword from the TV show.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. I figured you would like some of our battle-ready swords. This one's still more decorative than something that I would like to wield in combat, let's just put it that way. You see Renfri's brooch. It's the little smiley face emblem here.
That looks like it should be pretty decent for cutting too, because that's actually a good blade grind here. And I like the handle. You know, the way it swells in the center, tapers, and the cross section is quite good. That feels really good. And the pommel, I mean, I like scent stopper pommels, and that's basically what this is. You can hold on to it quite well.
It's a different sword in Season 2. But personally, I really like his Season 1 sword. His Season 2 sword, it looks a lot more simplified, I think, for lack of a better word. But yeah, we'll have to have you back one day so that we can do some fun cutting.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'll do some rage room cutting.
For sure, yeah. That would be good. I think just in terms of how it feels and handling and everything, that's my favorite so far. That's great, actually. I quite like that. And you know, that kind of decoration doesn't get in the way. They did that in history too. Like they put gems on and everything. This would not even be anything out of the ordinary.
Thinking about Viking swords and how they would have names, they would have spirits, almost like personalities. Some of the swords had their own personalities and character.
I also actually like how the two sides are different. Like it seems just like an aesthetic choice, but there's actually even a practical purpose to it, or you could make it practical in a sense. What I found is sometimes I don't think they did that necessarily in history, at least not I'm aware of, but you could have two different edges. You could have one finer edge that's for soft targets, so like unarmored combat, and you could have a sturdier edge. It's kind of a you know, thicker grind and more like apple seed grind. And this way you would know, like you can look at it and you know instantly which edge is which. So that would actually make sense. Might be an idea for a fantasy character who does this kind of thing, has like a different edge for different purposes, different types of enemies or whatnot.
That's a pretty interesting idea. I would love to create something like that, and then once again, see if you can come back to experiment with us.
Could even be like one serrated, one smooth, something like that.
That would be cool.
Could be a thing, yeah.
I like that.
But yeah, this one I definitely like, and you can tell that it's battle ready. You can definitely cut with that.
This is a sword called Aerondight. It's from the game Witcher 3. It's when you go to Toussaint. It's one of the DLC, like expansion packs. And you get this from the Lady of the Lake, but this is a legendary sword in Witcher lore.
I like the look, but I hate the pommel. This is, it's one of those that really interfere with how you're using it. Because normally you want to be able to move the hand down and maybe hold on to the pommel. Obviously that's not really happening. Depending on the hand size, it will be even worse because you've got this riser here. So that limits how far up you can go. And then you've got the jaws of the wolves that want to nibble. So you can't go this far, you can't go that far. Like, in one hand, it's fine. You could work around it, and that's something that can often be said for a lot of fantasy designs, where like you can work around some of the practical flaws. But of course, a good sword design makes it easier for you, not harder. You shouldn't have to work around the sword. The sword should be designed around what you want to do with it, right? So that's, yeah. But it looks good. Definitely say that. I actually even like these spikes here. You know, it's just a little aesthetic accent, I guess you would say. Because
It probably helps with trapping and control.
a little bit, yeah. I mean, there's one thing that is not really relevant here. If this was a straight guard, that would help prevent a blade from slipping off and going in directions. But the Quillons have pointed out that's already happening. They're already kind of funneling stuff into the center. But there's nothing wrong with that.
With one exception potentially, when wearing this on an everyday basis, the spikes might make the guard more prone to getting tangled up and snag on clothing. Well, Geralt carries his swords on the back, so not a problem, I suppose.
So this is one of our most popular swords that we sell at festivals just because of the look of the sword. A lot of people are just a huge fan of the look. It's a beautiful sword.
Yeah.
I know that there's some impractical elements from a physics practicality standpoint, like in terms of the pommel, but the first time I saw this sword in real life, I had a jaw-dropping moment because I remember spending, I think, it must have been over 30 hours trying to earn this sword in the game. And then it was beautiful in the game, and I find that this sword design is beautiful in real life. I'm a huge fan of, despite any of the impractical elements to it, I'm a huge fan of the design of this sword.
It does look good, for sure. Also, it's interesting how light it is. Now, I think in this case, the pommel probably does quite a bit to pull the balance back, because that's quite a bit of metal. And yeah, that would even work in single hand.